They hit the market at 4 a.m. London time and tried to smash silver through $70. It dropped to $70.67. It looked like a cliff, and it was designed to make you puke your position into their hands. And the wild part is, it didn't work. This is our desk, our community, our fight. Let's break down what they tried, what failed, and what the system accidentally revealed in the process. Because the candle you saw on your screen wasn't price discovery. It was a controlled demolition. They didn't aim for some random number. They aimed for a psychological tripwire. $70 is where a lot of retail stop losses cluster. $70 is where small accounts get squeezed by margin. $70 is where fear feels reasonable. So they punched it straight there. From the Asian Open around the low 71s, they shoved the paper market down to $70. 67 and waited for the cascade. The classic chain reaction. Red candle, panic selling, forced liquidations, then a deeper drop that lets them cover. That's the script they've used for years, but this time, the market swallowed the punch. Look at what happened right after the low. Instead of spiraling, it snapped. Not a polite bounce, a violent rip. The kind of rebound that tells you buyers were waiting like sharks under the surface. The kind of rebound that says, we were ready for your trick. And if you felt your stomach drop when you saw $70, 67s, you're not alone. That reaction is human. But the question we need to ask is the one they don't want us asking. If the paper dump was real selling, why did it get absorbed instantly? If the story is the rally is over, why did the bid show up like it was starving? Now watch this. That red candle was huge, but the volume on it was the giveaway. Millions of paper ounces got thrown into the market in a narrow window. That's not a natural crowd moving together. That's a coordinated hit. And the moment the hit landed, somebody on the other side said, thank you, and bought it. Not with emotion, with size, not with hope, with a procurement spreadsheet. Because the buyers who matter don't trade vibes. They trade supply. They trade delivery. They trade time. So by the time most people were waking up and doom scrolling the chart, the price had already been yanked back up. Back above the open. Back above the level they needed you to believe was broken. And that's why we need to call it what it is. A bear trap. They set it. They hit it with volatility. They hoped you'd step in it. And the bear walked right past. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you sold at the low, you didn't sell because you made a careful decision. You sold because the candle was engineered to hijack your nervous system. That's not an insult. That's the design. These moves aren't meant to beat smart people. They're meant to overwhelm normal people. They want your hands shaking. They want you clicking. They want you to hand them metal for a discount while they act like they're in control. But here's where this gets darker. The price action is the theater. The real story is what happened behind the curtain while everyone was staring at the stage. Because right around that flush, something else glitched. And it wasn't a chart. It was infrastructure. During that critical window, the London Bullion System's public-facing hub went down. Not a random blog, not a meme account. The front door of the Western physical market. And when that door goes dark, exactly when the market is under stress, we don't treat it like, oops. We treat it like a signal flare. People in our community noticed it in real time. They tried to load pages, got errors, saw the site not responding, and reported it while the candle was still forming. That matters. Because it tells us two things at once. First, we're not alone in this. We're watching together. Second, the system doesn't like being watched when it's bleeding. Now, skeptics will try to wave this away. It was just traffic. People were refreshing. Servers hiccup. No, this is institutional infrastructure. These entities run daily markets measured in billions. They are built to survive spikes. They are built to survive attacks. They don't just fold because a few thousand people hit reload. So let's talk about the uncomfortable possibility. What if the website went down because the numbers behind it didn't reconcile? What if the ledger tried to update and the math didn't work? Because in a physical market, there is one nightmare you cannot publish, a negative number. You can't have negative silver. You can't have inventory that exists 3 times on paper but only once in a vault. You can't have claims stacking on the same bar like layers of paint. And if the system is running on leases, swaps, rehypothecation, whatever polite word you want, then stress is what breaks it. Stress is what forces reconciliation. Stress is what asks the one question they hate. Show me the metal. Now ask yourself this. If everything is fine, why would a public-facing portal go dark at the exact moment of maximum stress? Why would transparency flicker when transparency is needed most? What would you do if you were sitting on numbers that could trigger a stampede? You'd buy time. You'd shut the blinds. You'd blame technical issues. You'd fix the display before the crowd sees the truth. And if that sounds dramatic, good. Because markets aren't polite. They're violent. They're violent when the narrative breaks. They're violent when a shortage stops being a rumor and becomes a line item. Now, while London was blinking, Something else happened on the physical side that should make your skin crawl. Small retail shipments out of Australia started getting blocked. Let that sink in. Not a container ship, not a refinery to refinery transfer. A simple retail package. Coins, a bar, a small order, held up at export. And that's not a random delay in a normal world. That's a policy trigger. Because customs doesn't manually review every little package like an old school post office. Customs runs software. And software doesn't get emotional. Software follows rules. So if tiny shipments are getting flagged, we have to consider the possibility that someone flipped a switch, a line of code, a filter. If commodity equals silver, hold. That's what resource nationalism looks like when it starts quietly. No speech, no press conference, just a slowdown, then a stop. And you might be thinking, okay, even if one country slows exports, the market can reroute. Sure, if this was one isolated hiccup. But what happens when multiple choke points tighten at the same time? Australia produces, Switzerland refines, London warehouses and clears. When those lanes get restricted, the supply chain isn't a river anymore. It's a dam. And here's the thing about dams. They don't sort of break. They hold, and then they fail. The only question is where the pressure releases. And when it releases, the move is not gentle. Now, let's confront the argument that always shows up right here. The price can't go that high argument. We've all seen it. The comment section fills with people saying, at $200, industry stops buying. Solar can't afford it. Manufacturers will switch materials. And parts of that logic sound clean, but clean logic collapses when it meets contract reality. Here's the framework we need to use. Fact, solar panels use silver paste as a conductor. Fact, you can't mass produce modern panels at current performance levels without that conductive layer. Interpretation, if silver becomes a much larger cost component, margins get crushed. That part is true, but here's the part that changes the game. Industry doesn't buy based on what it wants to pay. Industry buys based on what it must pay to avoid default. And default is a word that turns corporate balance sheets into ash. Let's make it concrete. A typical commercial panel uses around 20 grams of silver paste, give or take, depending on design. At around $70 an ounce, that silver cost is meaningful but survivable. At $200 an ounce, that silver cost becomes painful. It can wipe out profit. It can flip a project from margin to loss. So if you only live inside a textbook, you say demand disappears. But in the real world, these manufacturers aren't freelancing. They're contract bound. They have delivery schedules. They have utility scale projects. They have government tenders. They have penalties. And penalties are where the market becomes inelastic. If a manufacturer has a contract to deliver tens of thousands of panels by a specific date and they fail, they don't just lose revenue. They trigger penalties that can be enormous. They trigger lawsuits. They trigger financing covenants. They trigger reputational damage that kills the next order. So the decision stops being, do we like this input cost? And becomes, which option kills us slower? Option 1, refuse to buy silver because it's expensive, miss delivery, trigger penalties, and risk bankruptcy. Option 2, pay whatever the market demands for silver, take the loss on the batch, deliver, and live to renegotiate later. If we're honest, most executives choose survival. They pay the ransom. They don't pay because they're happy. They pay because the alternative is a corporate funeral. This is why demand destruction isn't a light switch. It's a collapse event. Demand doesn't disappear neatly. It holds until companies break. And before they break, they'll bid insane prices trying to breathe. So when we talk about a high silver price, we're not talking about luxury. We're talking about liability. We're talking about what it costs to keep the machine from seizing. Now zoom out. We just watched a coordinated flush fail. We just watched critical infrastructure blink. We just heard reports of physical export friction. That's 3 signals stacked on top of each other. And when signals stack, we don't shrug. We measure. We ask the next question. If they couldn't break $70 with a full force hit, what does that tell us about the real supply? If demand was fake, why did the rebound happen so fast? If inventories are full, why would transparency go dark under stress? If metal is abundant, why would borders start tightening on small shipments? Here's the mistake most people make. They watch silver like it's a stock. They think in sentiment. They think in headlines. But silver is not a story asset right now. Silver is a plumbing asset. It's pipes and valves and flow. And when the plumbing gets tight, price becomes secondary. Availability becomes everything. This is educational. We manage risk. But we also tell the truth. And the truth is, the game changes when the system starts protecting itself. Because once the system protects itself, it starts choosing winners, allocated versus unallocated, delivered versus promised, metal in your hand versus digits in an account. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do with your money. We don't gamble. We measure. But we can't ask the obvious question together. If a key market portal can go dark during stress, what exactly are you trusting when you hold a paper claim? If a shipment can get stopped at export, what happens when the squeeze turns from tight to critical? And here's the open loop nobody wants to say out loud. If this was the best shot, what's their next move? Because failed traps have consequences. When a trap fails, the hunter gets exposed, and exposed hunters get desperate. So let's map the next battlefield. They used volatility, they used a flush, they used the psychological level. They likely hoped for forced liquidation, and it didn't happen. So their next options get uglier. They can increase margin requirements, they can widen spreads, they can push narratives, they can blame speculators, but those are symptoms. They don't create metal, they don't refill a vault, they don't reopen a blocked shipment, they don't fix a ledger that doesn't reconcile. And that's why this morning matters. Not because the price dipped, but because it revealed the limits of their control. They could push the paper, they couldn't hold it down, they could scare people, they couldn't trigger a cascade, they could create chaos, they couldn't create supply. Now watch what happens psychologically. After a failed flush, fewer people believe the next flush. That's how manipulation loses power. Not in one heroic moment, in a slow decay of credibility. And the paper market is a confidence game. If enough participants stop believing paper is equivalent to metal, premiums become the headline. Delivery delays matter more than candles. The chart becomes a distraction. The real price becomes what it costs to actually get bars. Now, let's talk about the one thing we cannot ignore, the $80 area. Not because it's magical, because it's a psychological checkpoint. If price grinds back toward that zone after they failed at $70, the narrative flips. The bubble-popped story dies, and the people who sold panic to re-enter. That's where volatility can switch sides. That's where the squeeze begins to feed itself. Now, before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. When you saw $70, $16.7, what did you feel first? Fear, anger, or calm? And second question, because this one matters, do you think the website blackout was coincidence, or do you think it was a curtain being pulled? Drop your take in the comments. Our best advantage is that we think out loud together, because here's what we're building, whether they like it or not. A distributed sensor network, thousands of eyes. People catching glitches, delays, outages, odd premiums, strange shipping notices. And the mainstream can't compete with that. They report after the fact. We watch it live. Now, let's address the part that makes people uncomfortable. What if the next phase isn't about price at all? What if it's about access? Because access is what shortages attack first. And when a shortage gets serious, you don't wake up to $200. You wake up to out of stock. You wake up to delivery delayed. You wake up to allocation priority. You wake up to verification required. And by the time price prints, availability is already gone. That's the sequence. And if we're seeing early signs, portals blinking, exports friction, then the risk is not just a volatile candle. The risk is a system under strain making defensive choices. Now here's the twist. A system under strain often tries to project strength. It wants you to believe it's calm. It wants you to believe everything is normal. But defensive systems leak signals. They leak in small ways. A site goes down, a form errors out. A shipment gets held, a delay gets longer, a premium widens. Each signal is small. Together they form a pattern. And patterns are what we trade. Not rumors, not hype. Patterns. So where does that leave us right now? It leaves us with a market that tried to flush and failed. It leaves us with infrastructure that blinked under pressure. It leaves us with physical flow that appears to be getting sticky. And it leaves us with a bigger question. If the easy manipulation playbook didn't work at $70, what happens when the market decides to test the other direction? Because squeezes don't announce themselves with fireworks. They begin with failed drops. They begin with dips that refuse to stay down. They begin with strong hands realizing the bluff is thinning. And then one day, a small move triggers a chain reaction upward. Now, I'm going to give you a simple lens to keep your head clear. Fact. Paper selling can move price fast. Fact. Physical demand can absorb shocks when it's real. Interpretation. The faster the rebound, the tighter the physical market likely is. Possible risk. They come back with another flush, bigger, nastier, designed to exhaust you. So we do what we always do. We don't panic. We don't chase candles. We watch the signs that matter. Premiums, delivery times, exchange behavior, vault reporting, shipping friction. Because those are the fingerprints of a real shortage, and the fingerprints are starting to show. Now, one more open loop before we close this chapter. If London can go dark for a critical window, what happens during the next crisis window? Do they publish a new number that magically fixes the ledger? Do they change reporting rules? Do they delay updates? Those are not price questions. Those are governance questions. And governance is where the next shock might come from. So keep your eyes open. If you see something weird, an outage, a delay, a blocked shipment, say it, post it, share it. Because we don't win by shouting, we win by observing. Next, watch the quiet indicators, dealer premiums, shipping notices, and any sudden maintenance messages from exchanges. If we see another pre-dawn smash and it rebounds even faster, that's confirmation the pool is shallow. If it doesn't rebound, that's when the real shortage shows itself in public. Now, if you want to stay plugged into these real-time signals, hit subscribe. Short, simple. Subscribe so we catch the next move together. Because the line between manipulation and panic is thin. And after a failed bear trap, the next chapter usually isn't calm. It's violent, and it often starts when everyone thinks the danger is over.